So every decision that you make every moment of every day flows through your worldview. So worldview is critically important.
Hey, what's up, everybody? We got a great show for you today. If you've ever been sitting in church and you've heard your pastor say, according to such and such, 3% of Christians do this, or, Gen Z has about 25% that does this, you've probably seen some of my next guest's research. He's a name that is very familiar to a lot of Christians. It's Dr. George Barna. Welcome to the show. Dr. George Barna, it's good to see you again. We had the opportunity just to be together here recently in Naples or around there. Somewhere in Florida. You're kind of like me. You never know what city that you're in on a given day. So just for our audience, I think that especially for pastors out there and people who've been established Christians for a long time, your name is, they're no stranger to your name. As you were joking, I think you're either the most quoted person other than Jesus on Sunday mornings, and maybe misquoted person other than
most misquoted, yeah, in churches across the country.
Which, for our audience, that came out because I misquoted you to you on a percentage that I gave, and Dr. George goes, no, that's not really right, but it's so thank you for your grace on that. But just to kind of catch everybody, let's talk a little bit about just what you're doing today. I know there's a lot of back and forth between California here and Phoenix, and we have that in common of a lot of travel. So break down kind of where you're spending your time right now.
Yeah, so I'm working at Arizona Christian University, and we started the Cultural Research Center some years ago. And the whole focus of that is to try to understand how can we transform the culture so that it more approximates the kingdom of God. And we realized very quickly that really the centerpiece of that transformation is going to have to be around worldview. So every year we do a big national study where we evaluate the worldview of Americans. Call that the American Worldview Inventory. We've been doing that since 2020. And so it's become a very helpful tracking study. And then in addition to that, we do other pieces of research related to what we call the 7 mountains of culture, trying to understand what's going on in terms of influence and activity in those different domains of American society.
This worldview conversation is something that is very important for us here at TPUSA Faith. We talk about it a lot. One of the things that I get, if I share some of your research or, and I had the opportunity to be part of the...
or what you think is my research.
Think is your research. Yes, right. Exactly. Yeah. I'm going to think twice now about every stat that I ever give. And I had the opportunity to work with you and Tracy Munsell and others on the Helping Millennials Thrive book, which was a fabulous project that you guys put together there. For our audience, when you say a Christian worldview, what does that actually mean? How do you define that?
First of all, I never say a Christian worldview because
I am misquoting.
Yeah, you've done it again, my boy. Your consistency is good. Yes. One of the things that we discovered in doing the research is that that's the most commonly used phrase. I have a Christian worldview. And we researched that, and what we found is when people say, I have a Christian worldview, what they mean is, I go to a Christian church and I'm a good person. And therefore, whatever it is that I'm thinking is going to be blessed by God, or it must be consistent with His Word, or, I'm good, so how can it be wrong? So we've really latched onto the concept of biblical worldview, where, okay, we've actually got a stable standard now, one that's been proven over the course of time that we can trust. Secondly, how do we determine what's in it? I have a good friend, Wayne Grudem, the theologian, great man. And we were talking about this one day where I was describing what we're trying to do. He said, biblical worldview, huh? Well, you realize that means that a person with a biblical worldview would have to know everything in the Bible and do everything consistent with everything in the Bible. So good luck with that.
Right,
Thank you, Wayne. Yeah, you've been a great help. So what we did was we worked with a number of theologians, a number of professors, particularly at ACU, where we're a biblical worldview school. That's our whole focus. That's our distinctive, is that we want everything that's taught to be coming through the lens of Scripture.
Yeah.
And so we went back and over the course of several years, we put together an instrument that we believe touches on all the major bases of what does it mean to imitate Christ. Because a worldview is basically the lens that you have through which you experience and understand and respond to the world. It helps you make sense of reality. and helps you to figure out who you are within that reality. So every decision that you make every moment of every day flows through your worldview. So worldview is critically important.
Where we go with that at TPUSA Faith is we would target first pastors. And I know, and I'm not even going to try to quote the stats because I already know, I've learned my lesson but I know that there's issues with, biblical worldview for pastors. What's the percentage right now for senior pastors,
Senior pastors is 41%.
So 41% of senior pastors have a biblical worldview.
Right. And see, now you've got me being cautious. I'm thinking, wait a minute, I think it's 41. Wait a minute.
When Barna misquotes his own research, right? My guess is that there's probably a lot of people that think they have a biblical worldview that they don't. How do I know if I do or not?
Well, there are a few thoughts related to that. The first of those is you ask the question, do a lot of people think they have a biblical worldview, but they don't? We've done the research. And what we found is that about 2 out of 3 regular churchgoers fit in that category. Wow. Which I would contend is part of the reason why the church doesn't take this very seriously. Yeah. We don't think of it as a crisis. It's an absolute crisis. It's the crisis of the age. Mm-hmm. If we don't solve this, all the rest of the stuff are just symptoms of that crisis.
It's kind of an emperor has no clothes sort of situation.
Absolutely, yeah. So, where do you start? I wrote the book, Raising Spiritual Champions, to try to help parents to think through, how am I going to raise my children to have a biblical worldview and to be Christ-like? Because to be a disciple of Jesus means you're going to imitate Christ. How can you imitate Christ? Well, we've got to understand that you do what you believe. So I wrote about something that I discovered in the research that I call the 7 cornerstones of a biblical worldview. Because we found if you really own those 7 beliefs and then convert them into a lifestyle, you'll have an 83% probability of developing a complete biblical worldview. But if you reject even one of those 7, that probability of you having a biblical worldview drops to 2%.
Interesting. We got the book right here. It's called Raising Spiritual Champions. Highly recommend picking this up. And you said one of my favorite words, and that is discipleship. And obviously that's something that pastors and ministry leaders are participating in, or at least should be participating in. They think they're participating in. But it's also something, you alluded to this, that parents need to be participating in as well. I was actually sitting next to a well-known pastor. We'll leave his name off of this last night, and we had an event here locally over at Dream City, and Charlie Kirk was interviewing a few of our guests, and I leaned over to this pastor because we were doing a Q&A, and there were the aisles were just full of young people, and like hundreds of them, and they were lining up to the microphone to give their question, and I leaned over to this pastor he's a little bit older than I am, and these questions were so profound. They were, even the youngest to the oldest of these students were asking very deep. These were like, kind of existential type of questions. And I leaned over and I go, we were not asking these kind of questions when I was in youth group. We wanted to know, like, is it okay to kiss my girlfriend when nobody's around?
Can I pick up girls if I'm a Christian?
It was sex and dating and everything. And these kids were asking some very, very profound questions. And so I'm curious on, I feel like that is the job for parents harder today because of the information access to children out there? Like if for the parents that are out there watching, whether it's a pastor trying to raise their own kids or just another parent going, I'm assuming if they're watching our show, they at least have some interest in a biblical worldview. How do I instill that in my child? Where do they start?
Yeah, well, there are a number of places to consider. The first of those relates to your first question, which has to do with what really influences somebody to develop whatever their worldview is. A lot of different choices. Biblical worldview is just one of many. And what we found in the research is that the biggest impact on a person's worldview is the media content that they absorb. Much more than sermons and classes and all of that. It really comes down to they're looking for somebody that's going to give them a consistent understanding of how the world works. In America today, part of the problem we have is that people are developing their worldview based on their feelings, not based on a sense of truth. Why? Because we've pretty much abandoned the idea that absolute moral truth exists. It all comes back to us. We're the only one that can dictate our own truth, and therefore it comes back to feelings. So, where do you start? I'd start with those 7 cornerstones. Parents need to understand those, but how do you get kids to get into that? Well, it goes back to basic discipleship. How does that work? Build a relationship. Discipleship is all about relationship.
It's more about chiseling than sledgehammering, in that way.
Yeah, it really is. If your idea is I'm going to batter my kid with the Bible until it sinks in, it's not going to work.
Pastors, can I be real for a second? When was the last time that you looked into the company handling your church's giving platform? Because the reality is there's a lot of companies out there funneling money into causes that are completely opposed to the gospel we preach. It really becomes hidden wokeism. That's why I want to point you to a company that I trust, SecureGive. SecureGive isn't just another tech startup chasing profits. It was started by a pastor for pastors. Their goal is to strengthen the local church, not cash in on it. They're privately owned, debt-free, built right here in the USA, and rooted in biblical conservative values. No woke investors, no compromise. And when it comes to security, they don't play games. Your giving data is protected with industry-leading encryption. And if you ever need help, they've got real people that you can call, available 24/7, who care about your church just as much as you do. That's why major churches like Prestonwood and Dream City use SecureGive, and why I think that you should too. Visit securegive.com/turningpoint to schedule a conversation with their team today. SecureGive, where your mission is their mission. This episode is brought to you by Wildflower Coffee Company, specialty coffee brand founded by a Christian husband and wife team, the husband having proudly served in the U.S. military. Wildflower is committed to quality. All of their coffee is organic, roasted to order, direct trade, free from mold and mycotoxins, all made right here in the USA. They've just launched Mind Glow, a new mushroom latte mix that blends the energy boost of coffee with the adaptogenic power of 6 different mushrooms, ashwagandha, and the comfort of cacao. It contains no artificial flavors, binders, fillers, or gums, just clean, functional ingredients designed to support gut health, sharpen your focus, and help fight brain fog. Just add steamed milk and honey, and you're good to go. Head to wildflowercoffeecompany.com and use code STRONGCHURCH at checkout for 10% off your first coffee order. Again, that's wildflowercoffeecompany.com, and the code is STRONGCHURCH for 10% off. Let me share something that's truly life-changing. Pregnancy centers trained by SperaVita, who are seeing over 70% of abortion-minded women choose life. That's not a small win. That's 4 times the national average. This isn't just training, it's transformation. SperaVita equips pregnancy centers with real tools and gospel-grounded strategies to reach women before it's too late. And I've been able to work with them personally. Right now, with abortion pills being shipped straight to mailboxes, women are ending pregnancies in isolation, alone, scared, and without hope. SperaVita is stepping into that gap with clarity, compassion, and proven results. But more than that, they offer the hope of the gospel. Every encounter is an opportunity to save a baby and share the love of Jesus with a woman in crisis. Because she just doesn't need options. She needs someone who will walk with her in truth and grace. Here's how you can help. Go to SperaVita.com or SaveMoreBabies.com. Just $45 covers the cost to reach one woman at high risk for abortion. The goal? Train 250 centers, save 1 million lives. Be a part of it today.
My wife and I don't have children. We've lost a few along the way, and we have a lot of nieces and nephews that we love and adore, but we get to watch parents a lot. And you see what people do, what they don't do, and I just see so many missed opportunities to do what you're talking about, to really raise spiritual champions, to have that intentional, approach there. And I think that, it's easy to want to get mad at the parents, but as a pastor, I also get frustrated with the pastors because I think it's their job to disciple the parents, to get them to, it'd be nice if everybody had parents that was doing like what my dad did and really speaking that in, but I know that that's not the case. And so let's talk for a minute over to pastors. How can church leaders help strengthen parents and support them in such a way to have more conversations like this, besides buying your book and passing it out to everybody? So
there's more. Yeah. Part of it, I think, comes back to something that they'll say, well, of course you say that, you're a measurement guy, but it comes down to measurement. Most pastors that I've talked with have no idea where their congregants are on any kind of a scale of disciple maturity.
Yeah.
And it's because we don't have those kinds of conversations and we don't have that kind of measurement going on regularly. And so being very intentional and strategic about that is part of it. Another part of it is for a pastor to think through what are the different dimensions. Now at ACU, we measured this every year. So we had to go through that process. It wasn't easy. It took a lot of time. One of the sad things I've discovered over the last 40 some years of doing research is, for the most part, adults don't change. And so that's why I keep talking about kids. I mean, this was a major shift in my own perspective about ministry. I've been a pastor. I've been a teaching pastor in mega church. I've been a pastor of a house church, with a few dozen people, so big to small. Yeah, I've been there, done that, seen it, experienced it. I understand how difficult that is. But you've got to have a plan. You can't just be doing things that people enjoy, that make more people come, that feel good. That's not the point here. What we're trying to do is build disciples. So you got to think about, what do I know about these people? Where are they in their journey with Jesus? Do they have a journey with Jesus, or is it just coming to church and taking notes of me talking up here?
Yeah.
And that's what they think is discipleship. And then they get in a small group, everybody shares their ignorance, and we think, yeah, we're doing a great job. No, we're not.
I think about the work we do here, with Turning Point and TPUSA Faith. We spend a lot of our time reaching young people, going on college campuses. And, we have a high school program, a college program. And, we want to reach, adults as well. And we certainly have a lot of adults that come to our events and things. And we're always thankful for that. But, we're seeing the biggest uptick in kind of excitement and changes and involvement from the younger population right now. And I think that's speaking to what you're saying. You had said something when we were in Florida here recently, and I'm not going to quote it because I'll mess it up, but you had said something about about children's pastors. Do you remember what that was?
Yeah, when I look at the local church and try to figure out, okay, how is it going to serve the kingdom of God best? It's going to do that by raising children up to be spiritual champions. Whose responsibility is that? Well, it's the parents' responsibility. But children's pastors get to work with those children, and ideally they should be working with the parents as well, supporting the parents in what they're trying to do at home and everywhere else with their children. And when the kids come onto the church campus, the idea is we're just continuing what the parents are already doing because we have such good communication with them. We know where they're going. They know what we're suggesting and what we're seeing, what we recommend, what resources we have, and what we're going to do with their children for the 1 hour a week that we get them.
Right.
So, but part of the problem there too, I also talked about, is that but only 12% of children's pastors have a biblical worldview.
Well, it's a pastor. It's the one that you think the least about in terms of biblical. Your discipleship pastor. We got to make sure he's really astute and he went to seminary and the guy who's doing spiritual development. They have to have this and if they're going to be on the stage, well, they have to have a biblical worldview, of course, right? But it kind of like the priority, I think, in a lot of pastors' minds. I don't think intentionally, but it just they've only got so many people to choose from. So you've got a pulse and you like kids, so let's put you over there.
Yeah.
And I think that what I'm hearing you say is if we got to make a choice, if anything, it should be reversed. Adults have more ability to rationally think through and go, no, that doesn't sound quite right. Where students are just a sponge, at that point receiving information.
Yeah. And so if we can get children's pastors who have a biblical worldview, that will then influence the parents as well as the children. And that's really what needs to happen.
So good.
It would be great if we had senior pastors with a biblical worldview. By and large, we don't. But if we could do that, that would then encourage the parents to continue in what they're getting through the children's ministry. We've got this wacky idea that children's ministry is only for children. It really isn't, because that's just there to support the family, to support the parents, the grandparents. By the way, we haven't even touched on grandparents. And one of the things that I found in doing the research for the book is that, to a large extent today, at least in America, grandparents are doing more of the discipling of young children than parents are. A greater percentage of them, 4 times as many grandparents in America today, have a biblical worldview as compared to the parents. So it's a good thing that grandparents are in that game, but we can't leave them out of the equation. We've got to support them as well.
Yeah, I speak to probably that audience quite a bit, especially at our church back home, and that's always an area I try to encourage them. I think that I see a lot of grandparents that don't fully comprehend the level of weight and influence that they carry, not only in their children's lives but in their children's lives, and I think that is something that is a really huge takeaway here is if you're out there and you have grandkids to take the time to make sure. And I've heard from grandparents out there that, they're conservative, they have a biblical worldview, their children do not. Kind of the millennial generation and maybe young Gen Xers and these things. And though their children will create rules. Well, you can't take my son or daughter to church, or you can't talk to them about Jesus and these things. And it becomes challenging, I think, for a lot of grandparents. And I think that sometimes people choose peace over influence, or peace over truth. We could say it that way maybe. And what would you say to somebody in that sort of situation where their child has is an oppositional worldview to theirs, but they are still trying to influence their grandchildren? Any tips on how they can navigate that?
I think the mindset is to recognize all of this as part of the big spiritual battle. Mm-hmm. And so, number one, it's not surprising. Number two, that doesn't mean that we give in, because then we lose.
Yeah.
And so always maintain the relationship, with your child, with your grandchildren, because that's the bridge that you need to cross to get the love and the truth, the compassion of Christ in front of them.
So let me ask you, we just got a few minutes left here, but we're just a little short time here into a new presidency. There's been a lot of excitement across the country about just an increase in conservative values. We're seeing a lot of things that are exposed that, as biblical conservatives, we've been probably worried about or concerned about for some time. Where's your thought, not necessarily from a political standpoint, but how does what is happening politically, any predictions on how you see that affecting worldview in this nation? How big of a role does it play on it? And where do we go from here?
Well, the good news is right now there's, I would say, greater freedom for us to be bolder about our faith.
Yeah.
And so it's a window of opportunity. Who knows how long it's going to be open? We need to jump through that window as quickly as we can and run as fast as we can toward the opportunities. Secondly, though, I recently put out a report about 12 trends we see happening in 2025. And some of those are faith-oriented trends. And one is that we know that there are going to be more churches closing. We're going to have fewer pastors in America over the next 5 years. Biblical worldview we see continuing to decline because we don't have enough disciples who are actually willing to disciple other people. We haven't come to the place where we recognize you reproduce who you are.
Yeah.
And so the only people that can make disciples are disciples.
Yeah.
And as we do the preliminary numbers, I'm working on a big project on discipleship right now, but the preliminary stats indicate that only about 3% of adults in America meet the 6 criteria Jesus gave us for what makes somebody a disciple. And, 3% of the adult population. Now, that's not very much. That's got to increase. The only way it will increase is if those 3% get busy making more disciples.
Wow.
Right now, less than half of them are actively discipling anybody else.
George, I want to thank you so much for being here with us at TPUSA Faith, Strong Church. And if people want to find out more about you, where can they go and learn, as well as about what you're doing here at Arizona?
Yeah, a few different places. They can go to culturalresearchcenter.com. All the research we do, we put it online free. People can take it, download it, share it, but use it. That's why it's there. GeorgeBarna.com has that, plus the books that we've been putting out. Most recent book, Raising Spiritual Champions, they can go to raisingspiritualchampionsbook.com.
Awesome. The book is Raising Spiritual Champions. I'm your host, Lucas Miles, here at Strong Church. My guest, Dr. George Barna. All the information will be in the show notes. Until next time, we'll see you back here at Strong Church. Stay bold.